Hello, my name is Ben Walton, and this is my final project for EDUC 552. The topic of my project is violent media's influence on school-aged children. Ever since the invention of television and installing into the many homes of America, the question of the levels of influence of seeing violent acts, plays on people, has been asked. Now in more recent times, television is not the only method that students have access to violent images. The technology of today allows a constant connection to mass media via television, mobile phones, internet access, films, tablets, etc. Many believe that the exposure to violent images in mass media can lead some students to become more violent themselves. Whether they mirror directly the images they see or are just influenced to misbehave, mass media may be a factor in the way some students act. So therefore, my hypothesis for this research is as follows. If exposure to violent acts via mass media is growing and has negative effects on children, then it may lead some students to become more violent in both the school and home environment. So first off, what is mass media? For this research, mass media is defined as television programs, movies, electronic games, internet websites, and online videos. There's been a lot of research on this topic, and according to Bushman and Anderson in 2001, state that psychologists have been studying the effects of violent media for decades and that hundreds of studies have been conducted on the research. One example is a 2-year study conducted by Hoff, Huber, and Weib of 2008, stating that the total exposure to media violence directly influenced antisocial behavior and violence beliefs in tested subjects. Due to the overwhelming research on the topic, the American Academy of Pediatrics and 5 other well-respected medical groups signed a resolution stating studies on this topic overwhelmingly show the connection between violent media and violence in some children. And that was from a Congressional Public Health Summit of 2000. As technology becomes more available for children to use due to the lower cost of electronic devices and the prevalence of these implements in our society, the number of hours that we all spend in front of the screen is on the rise. In a Kaiser Family Foundation study of 8 to 18-year-olds, in 2009, this age demographic had 10 hours and 45 minutes of exposure to media every day, and by adjusting the numbers by the time multitasking of media types, the total media use per day for an individual was 7 hours and 38 minutes. That's an increase of 20.7% from the years 1999 to 2009. And that's from Reithauer, Fohrer, and Roberts of 2010. Not only is there an increase in the number of hours children are spending using media, the amount of violence portrayed seems to be on the rise as well. According to the National Television Violence Study, 61% of over 10,000 hours of television assessed portrayed violence in a glamorized way. Also, Yokota and Thompson from 2000 found that children's animated feature films produced between the years 1937 to 1999 had 100% portrayed violence with the intent to cause injury shown in them. It seems, though, that not all violence in media is detrimental to selected children, according to Anderson 2003. Anderson argued that there are many influences to how effective portrayed violence in the media can be in shaping the actions of children. Characteristics such as the similarity of actors to the viewer's age, sex, and race, the attractiveness, the authority, and the charm of the perpetrator, as well as if the violence is seen as realistic or comical, are factors that play an integral part in the level of influence in the violent act. Also, it seems that if a child understands that the act is simulated and that if it were real, there would be consequences, then the influence of the violence and the desire to mirror the action is lessened. That being said, though, a majority of the research done for this paper shows that most researchers and psychologists feel that violence in media does play a negative role in regards to children. So let's move on to the research I did for this project. The purpose of the research was to find if parents, school counselors, and child psychologists feel that the mass media plays a role in the aggression levels of school-aged children. I decided to do a 3-part study. The first was a parental survey, then a school counselor survey, and then a child psychologist interview. The parental survey consisted of 15 parents of children ages 2 to 18. The parents were asked questions about their observations of their children after viewing violent content. The survey was given to random parents found throughout the community. Consisting of 6 questions, the parental survey focused on the mass media's influence, and the majority of the questions were a Likert scale, ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. The second instrument used was a school counselor survey. It was filled out by 5 local middle school and elementary school counselors. Like the parental survey, the content focused on the counselors' interpretations of the media effects on the children they work with on a daily basis within their schools. The counselor survey consisted of 5 questions where the majority of the responses were, once again, a Likert scale ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. The final instrument used for the research was a one-on-one interview with a licensed child psychologist. This interview consisted of 6 base questions with more questions asked based off the responses of the interviewee. The questions first focused on the background and expertise of the psychologist, then moved to their judgment of the mass media's influence of the youth. After completing the surveys, the one major issue that I could think of for internal validity that I could see is what is violence? Violence and aggression are subjective terms. Everybody has a different interpretation of what violence is. Since the idea of violence and aggression are subjective, the results could have been skewed by the interpretations of those terms. The way I worded the questions, though, I left it up, for example, in the parental survey, I left it up to the parents' judgment of what violence was. Same for the school counselor and the child psychologist. So the first survey completed was the parental survey. Once again, it was sent out to 15 parents of school-aged children. The first 2 questions consisted of just generic questions to get some demographics. The first one was the average number of children of the people surveyed, and the second was the average age of those children, which you can see here is the number of children is 2, and the average age was 12. Now when it came to question 3, 4, 5, and 6, these were on a Likert scale. Question 3 was, my child acts more aggressively after they have watched a program that I feel has violence portrayed. It was pretty close on this one. 2 of the parents had no opinion, 5 disagreed with that comment, and 8 agreed. So it was very split. Just 53% of the people polled, just over half, felt that violence on TV made their child act more aggressively, which is actually quite opposed to question 4, which was asking about the influence of video games on violence. I decided that when I went through my discussion on this, that I would remove the no opinions. I did that because I believe that those parents didn't have opinion about video game violence because their kids didn't play video games, so they couldn't have an effect. Either they were too young to play violent video games, or they just didn't play video games. So that left me with 7 people for this result. So that shows that 71% of parents surveyed under that category of video game violence felt that it did have negative effects on their aggression levels of their child. This made me think that parents see video game violence as more influential than television violence. I think that was interesting and maybe has to do with the fact that the child is actually interacting with the game as opposed to just watching the program. Question 5 asked, do you think that television shows, news shows, reality shows, scripted shows have an effect on the actions of your child either positively or negatively? Overwhelmingly, most of the parents agreed with that, which is interesting. So maybe they're seeing a greater positive influence of television shows, like the kid willing to share or sing or play, because those are some themes that they show on younger children's programming. So maybe they're getting that positive feedback as opposed to the negative violence feedback. And then question 6, much like question 4, only it was in regards to internet. So once again, I got rid of the no opinion section because the kids were probably too young to be using the internet effectively. And so that left with 6 believing that the internet did have an effect on their child and 3 that it didn't. So that means 67% felt that their child was influenced. Once again, higher than the original television influence question. The second survey was for school counselors. The first question was just to get a kind of a background, and the average number of years that these counselors have been counseling has been 11.2. Now, as opposed to the parent survey, the counselor survey was overwhelmingly agree. Question 2 dealt with the effects of media in general. Question 3 asked if children recreate actions taken from the media. Question 4 asked about violent video games. And question 5 asked about violent television shows. Overwhelmingly, almost 100% of the counselors surveyed felt that all of these aspects have an effect on the student, which is very interesting because that's quite different than what the parents saw. And the final instrument used for my research was an interview with a child psychologist. I went online, I did some research and found one in the area, and I did the interview over the phone. The first question was just about their background. They've been dealing with troubled youth for quite a long time. The other 4 questions dealt with their feelings on mass media and its effect on kids. Much like the school counselor, the child psychologist interview would seem to support my hypothesis. The psychologist mentioned many times that violent media has an influence on children, and research that they have looked at would support this opinion. Mentioned was the fact that during the developmental stages of children, they are very susceptible to outside influences, and that violence seen in the early ages could be a large influence. So the child psychologist definitely agreed with the school counselors that mass media does play a role in the aggression levels of troubled youth. So did my research match my hypothesis? Well, to me, the watching and engaging in violent media could cause susceptible children to act more violently, and I believe the research conducted in this project would back that assumption. Although there were some mixed responses by parents, the school counselors and child psychologists felt without a doubt that violent media could increase the aggression in some children. I think that one of the limitations of my research in regards to the parental survey was the size of the pool of people surveyed. If measured was a larger number of parents from various demographics, I feel that the results would be closer to the observations of the counselor and the child psychologist. If my research would continue, I would definitely try to survey more parents as well as counselors to get a larger sense of their opinions on the matter. This said, though, like I said before, I feel that my research does support the hypothesis that violent media can cause susceptible children to act more aggressively, and the idea matches the studies conducted by other professional researchers in the field. This is just showing links to where I got my images. And here are my references used in this presentation. Thank you for listening to my presentation.